The Holy Gospel according to St. John from the 12th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead, and there they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
As I was sitting there listening to the Philippians text that was read to us, there's something that's striking in that. Something that you may have heard before or was said over you at baptism, and you may not know it. In the old red hymnal, you remember the old service book and hymnal? With all the old language of thee and thy and all of that. In that, in the good old days for Dave Dote, for those of us who like language that we speak today, and these are the good old days. But for those who enjoyed that, there was a saying that was said as the baptisend was brought to the baptismal waters, and a cross was placed on the head. And the saying from the pastor was, "Receive the cross of Christ, that you may know the power of his resurrection." And, does anybody know what the rest of it was? Do you know it, Linda? Life in the world to come is not it. The joy in his sufferings. The power of his resurrection and joy in his sufferings. How many of you have enjoyed suffering or can find joy in suffering? That's hard, isn't it? That's really hard, and that's what these scriptures open to us today. That we have a hope in the power of Christ's resurrection, but there's also a deep joy that we have in his sufferings. There's an old line in the Easter Vigil that says, "Oh, happy fault that brought us so great a Redeemer," reminding us of Genesis back at the time, how great it was that Adam sinned in order that we might have a Redeemer. That line always bothers me. Why in the world am I happy about that fault committed by Adam? Why am I happy about the faults that I commit so that I can have a Redeemer? It's almost like you got to be cruel to be kind, and that kind of philosophy just bothers me. Jesus is visiting in Bethany, the home of Lazarus. He has just raised Lazarus from the dead. And the very last thing he says when he leaves the family, "Unbind him and let him go." He's bound because he's been in the tomb. But he's also bound because of what his culture tells him. We all are bound by our culture. We make decisions based on our culture. We make our lives based on our culture. We cannot imagine life or decisions made in any other way than the way we make them, because it's dictated by our community. It would be ridiculous for us to step outside of that. And yet Jesus, when he comes in to John's gospel, when he comes on the scene, the very first thing he does at the beginning of the gospel, chapter 2, is the wedding at Cana. something that's never been seen before. They run out of wine. And when you run out of wine, of course, the party's over. We know that. And he makes water to be poured into the jugs, the huge jugs for purification. Remember this story? And then the next thing he says, go and take some out, and it's turned into the best wine that anyone has ever tasted. Reminding the people that whenever Jesus is around, the bridegroom, the Messiah, the Son of God is here. And it's about celebration. It's not about death. It's about life, an abundant life. And John's gospel shows us that abundance all the way through to the end. Even as Jesus, through his own power, gets on the cross and dies. And in John's gospel, it's some glorious thing that happens because Jesus is on his throne in his gospel on the cross. And as he is on his throne on the cross, we know that he has complete power over life and death, and he chooses death in order to conquer death. So on the heels of Lazarus being raised from the dead, he tells the people, unbind him and let him go. His way of saying, the kingdom of God is here and now, and it's something different. It's what Isaiah said. It's water in the desert. It's rivers springing up where they can't be. It's total chaos to those of us who want things to be exactly the way they are. And yet Jesus comes in and says, the whole world's been opened up to new possibilities now. And now he comes back to Bethany. And this time he sits down to a meal. And Mary has been saving this pound. You know what a pound of butter looks like. She's been saving this pound of costly perfume. Now, if you've never smelled nard, have you ever smelled valerian? Valerian is a plant that's about this tall. It's got long stalks and a beautiful panoply of flowers on top. Little tiny white flowers. No bees pollinate it. Flies pollinate it, which is the oddest thing, because you stick your nose into it and there's a faint smell of dirty socks. Because if you dig up the root, it smells horrible. But it was the first Valium that we had. And so Valium has been synthesized from this root of valerian. And it's been, of course, extracted just the things that you need in order to make people sleepy. But as you smell this flower, it smells almost narcotic. It's such a heady smell that every time I stick my nose in it, and I do it every spring because I want to smell again that wonderful smell. It's such a heady smell. It's not completely dirty socks, dote. It's a wonderful smell. It's narcotic. You stick your nose in it and smell, and then you step up and you're almost taken off your feet because it has just totally overpowered you. Nard is related to valerian. So the smell of this, just imagine, it's intoxicating. And it's spilled out into the streets. And as it spills out into the streets, you know, you've smelled whenever somebody walked into a room and you think, man, did you leave any in the bottle? You know, you've smelled that before. And it's intoxicating. It almost gives you a headache. It's spilled out into the streets, no doubt, in Bethany. And people, no doubt, are saying, who died? Because they know this smell. This smell is the smell of death. And yet, Mary anoints Jesus' feet, and she has no inkling that he's going to die. She anoints him because she's happy. She anoints him because she's joyful. She anoints him because he has raised her brother from the dead, and she said, forget it all. I don't care if it takes me 100 years to buy another pound of nard. I'm going to put all this on his feet now and share it with him now. It's that whole mentality that we have. You can't take it with you. You may as well spend it now. And that's the way she's thinking. Spend it now on this man who just saved my brother. And not only saved my brother, but saved me and my sister too. Because they live at home with their brother. And without him, they have nothing. She knows that he's life. She knows that he's not just life, but abundant life. And she lavishes this perfume all over his feet and wipes his feet with her hair. So she smells like death herself. Something is dying within her. And that something that's dying within her is exactly what Jesus said at Lazarus' tomb, where he walked out and said, "Unbind him." She's unbound. She's totally unbound from all of the vagaries of everything that would tell her, this is ridiculous, you wasted money, you shouldn't have done this. And let's be honest about it. Judas Iscariot is only saying what every one of us would have said. It's as if you would have invited Mother Teresa to a dinner and brought out an $800 bottle of wine and said, "Everybody drink up." And everybody is like, wait a minute, that's Mother Teresa. She's not really the kind of person you give an $800 bottle of wine to. This is ridiculous. It's that ridiculous. And yet Judas is saying exactly what all of us would have said. Why in the world did she just waste that? I feel sorry for Judas. I don't care if he's a thief. I feel sorry for him because he cannot see what this woman at Jesus' feet can see. Instead of washing his feet with water like any slave or servant would do, she washes him with the most costly perfume in her possession. And the whole world is shut down around her. And all of this perfume is wafting out into the street. And all that the people can think of is death, and all she can think of is life itself. How often is that the case of us? We cannot. From time to time when we come here, we just go through the ritual. We go through, okay, let's stand up, let's sit down, let's stand up during the gospel, let's go to the altar and let's get our little slug of wine and a piece of bread, let's dip into the wine. And we just go through those motions as if somehow we're just dead. And we just dunk and eat and dunk and eat, almost as if we're just robots. And in reality, what Jesus says to us this day through this gospel, what Mary is saying to us through this gospel is, in the presence of this one Jesus, death is gone. Death is gone. This has no power over us. Of course, Lazarus will die again. Of course, Mary and Martha both will die. They know that. But the power and the sting of death have nothing over them because they know that they are held in God. They don't know what that looks like, and frankly, we don't either. But we have a hope within us. We have a hope so deep within us that it's almost as if rivers and springs are springing up all around us, even in those desert moments. As I met with Norma Bailey and her family through the weeks, the 4 months that Lowell had died, and Norma knew that she was on borrowed time. She knew that the doctor had told her, "You've got about 6 months to live." Well, the doctor was right. She had less than 6 months. And all of that time, she kept saying, "I just want to be with Lowell. I just want to go. I just want to be beside Lowell." And I looked at her one day and I said, "You want to be beside Lowell because you want to pick on him some more, don't you?" And she said, "Well, yeah, because that's what I do." But the thing is, she didn't want to be away from him. And that was the suffering part for her. That was the difficult part for her. That was the time for her whenever she couldn't cope. And yet, when the moment was getting closer, she looked at her daughters and she said, I do want to be with Lowell, but I don't want to die to get there. And I understand that. And that's the tension in which we live our lives. We just go through the motions day after day. We go through the motions of, well, yeah, I'm a Christian and I'm just going to do these things because it feels good or it's what I'm supposed to do. But in reality, we do these things because they give us life. And they remind us that life is ours. Even beyond the grave, life is ours. And what that looks like, I have no idea. I have no idea. But I do know that we have a hope in Jesus Christ. Hope in his resurrection. Because we have gone through the joy in his sufferings. The great joy in his sufferings is that at the end of John's gospel, he does climb on the cross, he does die, and he dies in order for us to have that relationship with God. In order that that broken relationship that we once had is now mended. And since it's mended, since it's brought back, now we can enjoy what Mary is doing at the feet of Jesus. We can take our pound of nard and we can say we celebrate life as well. We, of all people, know that life is ours. What's that look like for us, though? What does it look like to share life? It looks like 10 plus years of Fern saying to everybody, you know, this is difficult for you. And we're there with you, and we're going to continue to pray with you. But for right now, we're going to sit down and eat. And we're going to enjoy this meal. That's what it looks like. But that's not all it looks like. It looks like the little things that each of us do every day, and the big things that we do every day, as we give our life for the sake of the one at whose feet we bow. At whose feet we bow and anoint because we know he is life and life abundant. Rejoice in the life. I know in the season of Lent it's not supposed to be rejoicing. Rejoice! Rejoice in the life that we have. And rejoice in those moments when the pride inside of us dies and the Christ inside of us springs up the more to show others that life, the life of the world. Amen.